Well, hello. Piedmont Tug, the COVID, what's this, our third, maybe our third COVID. I can't see any of the chat box or anything to see if there's any questions, Alyssa. So if you see anything, just bring to my attention. That'll be great. Here's
Okay.
our agenda for today. It's going to be short and sweet. We're hoping to really just, there's not going to be any data visiting or anything that I'm going to be doing and sharing. We're going to talk about a new initiative by Tableau, and then we're going to talk about a little bit of most of us who are at conference, some of the things that we liked from there. So let's just start from here. Here's the agenda. So I'd like to get started. Really quickly, this is me. There'll be PDFs of this sent out, so you can figure out who we all are and get in touch if you need some more information. Here's Brad. Brad gives me a hand getting all this stuff, set up. We are looking for a little more support. So if you want to join us and do some work with social media, community connections, things like that, you can reach out as well. And, to start us off, what I wanted to share with you, if you're not aware, Adam had put out an announcement about the Racial Justice Data Initiative, which I was very excited to see, because in this time and space, to really come out and respond in a responsible way about data. We sort of did this around COVID, making sure that the questions we were asking around COVID for the data that the platform that Tableau was hosting was cogent. And we now have this initiative, and it's just brand new. I mean, brand spanking new. So there's been maybe one meeting of the group, but I thought it would be great if maybe we could just talk with a few of the people that are going to be part of it, because obviously they were selected to be part of it for doing things in their little corner of the world or interests that they may have. So I don't want to spend a lot of time preambling all that, because I'd really like just for you to meet them. So I'm going to ask them all to introduce themselves, maybe in the order they appear on the slide, just to keep it simple. That would be great. Oh, stop. What?
Nothing.
You all look adorable.
No, I was like, why do I have to be first? But I will. All right.
We can read it like the Torah, and Josh can go first if you prefer.
No, all right. So I'm Kendra Rae, and I'm based out of Columbus, Georgia, but I'm originally from Seattle. So my work, I guess before, and then just recently a Tableau ambassador, and then on this this equity task force. I am the CEO and founder of Lamotus, which is a boutique analytics and data visualization consulting firm. In addition to, most recently, I'm the Tableau evangelist for Aflac. So, work for insurance.
Aflac.
I know, quack, quack. And then in terms of my work in the DEI space, I mean, it kind of goes all the way back to like 2001 when I was a student ambassador.
Define your acronym though, just so.
Diversity, equity, inclusion.
Thank you.
Pow, pow, pow. Yeah, okay. And then was that enough? Was that good enough? All right. And so I'm super random, as you kind of could imagine, but my work in this space really started in 2001 when I was a student ambassador at the University of Washington, where we specifically recruited underrepresented, communities, like, we did outreach and stuff like that. And those communities include, underrepresented people of color, but also first generation college student, or, potential, like, first generation, like nobody in their family ever went to college, or, very rural communities on the eastern side of the state. Because largely just to bridge, access challenges and barriers that a lot of these communities actually face. But, kind of, and then even now, just kind of speaking into this space is just everything I do pretty much, in my kind of free time is about mentorship, and also making sure that even though I might be the first one at the table that looks like me, that I won't be the last one. And eventually there will be more than one. So that's kind of a personal mission of mine. And so I kind of eat, breathe, and live that. So that's me.
Cool. Hi, everybody. I'm Siddele McCall. On the Tableau side, Tableau featured author, member of this group. Most of my work is also in digital data and communications data. So my day job is a director of digital insights at a reputation firm here. And so my work is, by day, it's using data to advance Fortune 500 companies and whatever it is that they do from a reputation and business impact perspective. But I've really focused a lot of my time, my personal time, in considering how data and information, but also how messages influence underrepresented communities. So my graduate work was in thinking about how social media augments social movements, and got to work with some awesome people early in my post-grad life, looking at how data and information gets to people. How do we get diffuse information to individuals who may not be at the forefront of a lot of people's minds? And most recently, I got the opportunity to work on the comms team for the Fairfax in the Northern Virginia area. So the Fairfax NAACP, doing the same thing. How do we get information related to education, housing? Voting is a huge thing right now. So hopefully everyone has a plan to vote. That's as far as I'll go for this talk. But
I voted.
Great, love it. So yeah, I mean, so in general, my biggest passion is, we've all got this ability to obtain information at lightning speed. How do we make sure that every single person has that same ability to access information and to use it? So I love being a part of this task force because we get to think about how to put data in the hands of every single person, no matter where you come from or what you did beforehand. So excited to be here.
Thank you. Josh?
Yeah, I suppose that has me up. So Joshua Smith for the Tableau portion of things on this equity task force. I'm also going to preface this by saying I'm going to bring a fraction of the energy that Kendra brought to this. So just prepare yourself for that differential as we talk about the first and the last speaker. Also a Tableau Zen Master and public ambassador. For the professional and paid stuff, I work at Cover My Meds as an analytics manager. Cover My Meds helps get patients the medication they need to live healthy lives, most specifically by working through the electronic prior authorization space. And so I provide analytics to help that happen. For representation on the equity task force, I think my little nuanced view of the world comes from one, the rural community that's already been mentioned a couple of times. Grew up way in the backwoods on a tree farm. Loved growing up that way, but that also meant I was the first generation to hit college, and I really feel and see back in my home community that lack of information availability that was just mentioned, right? And people just not getting their hands on the data that we can at lightning speed, and if they can, not necessarily having the data fluency to interpret that information. And then also an invisible disability. So I have ulcerative colitis, which is an invisible autoimmune disorder, and just really brings, after 10 years, it feels like a normal lifestyle, and I forget what it's like to really live without it, but it does impact most ways I can interact with the world and others. And so when we think about diversity, and especially for intersectionality, right, thinking about the overlap between a lot of chronic illnesses like mine and other demographics, and the value of providing options to people like that so that we can make sure that our community is more inclusive. Before we worry about me rambling too much, I'm going to call it a day and move on to the next topic and the next conversation piece.
But I'd like to reflect on all of that, because like you reminded me, Josh, of we're all talking about the other. right? Whether, and I don't know if we were live when we were talking about that, but Kendra was talking about, like, it's not just about race, it's not just about gender, it's this otherness that we all have to work through. And if we don't see ourselves represented in the data, how meaningful is it to us? Just really quickly, I was sharing before we went live that, I was the sound of one hand clapping, is what I always thought, because like I would be asked to speak at, the Fringe Festival for Tableau in different time zones and everything. And, I couldn't come at it with this like racial bias and algorithm. So I always made sure the data I was using was coming out of either the census and to be perfectly honest, when I first started, I was like, race doesn't matter. There's no race. There's no biology. It's like it's a political entity. And then I started looking at my data and I was noticing certain patterns that were impacting disadvantaged neighborhoods. And then I was discovering barriers that made certain people larger percentages of the population in those disadvantaged communities. And I just started really digging into being able to look at the census data in a meaningful way, working with the Furlodge twins and having them help me learn how to do some skills to pull out some data dictionaries and to automate some of the stuff. So I wasn't spending so much time prepping the data. So I just wanted to share, why I lean into this topic as well, and then move it back over to the panel to maybe ask about, it's a really broad initiative that we're talking about. And I'm just wondering what little bite-sized pieces do each, brings you to the table, maybe in a more specific way than when we were introducing ourselves. But does anyone want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, and I think we kind of talked about this earlier as well, is
my fear is we were just talking to ourselves before we went live, which is why I'm kind of looping back to make sure we capture all that.
Yeah, that's possible. So I'll definitely try to bring this here. Is that I think we all kind of have a similar story, which is that whenever we first got into the community, we were the only person that looked or felt like us, based on whatever that experience is. And so from my perspective, it's how do we speed up the pace at which people encounter other people that look like them and find their community? Because I think the gap between the current speed and the speed that we have in an ideal state is the gap between people staying and leaving the community, because they just decide everyone looks like this. In order to progress in the Tableau community, I have to look and feel like this, so I'm not going to do it. And until you run into other people and other experiences, it's really hard to do that. So from my perspective, whatever we can do to start to close that gap is a big part of what I'm going to try to bring here.
And I really like that, because I used to think that if it wasn't a Sankey diagram or something super funky and interactive and beautiful, that I wasn't contributing. And so I would try to make these great things and send it over to my clients, and within 2 days they'd break it and it wouldn't be, they wouldn't be able to use it. So you really understanding how to make the data question very specific to the audience that you're talking to, is something that we can all learn, no matter what our skill level and skill set is. So I appreciate that you were saying that. So, who else is thinking about specificity? And, I know Kendra kind of touched on like her interest, but realizing how general, this original ask is of the community. What is your edge that you want to bring and you want to highlight? Because I think it's your uniqueness that brought you all together. And I realize you're 3 of 12 or 3 of 9, 3 of 12, right?
Oh, I think.
Yeah.
I think for me, I guess the edge, if you will, I think I am an edge. I mean, just in general, but I think I speak truth to power. Like, I'm not afraid of ruffling feathers and stepping on toes, and because this matters a lot to me on so many different levels. And so as much as I thought I could affect change from the outside, having a seat at the table on the inside, and having direct communication lines and, to whether it's Tableau leadership or the folks that are making decisions, I felt like I could, it wouldn't be just Twitter noise, because I think a lot of times, dust ups on Twitter are just that. And really, when we talk about, let's say the data equity hub, like, I don't just want to be in a waiting position. I want to be going, okay, so when is this going to get done?
Wait, could you say a little bit about what that is for people that aren't as familiar as we are?
Yeah, so Tableau is, and I think they were talking about this during the conference, but they're working on a data hub, because part of the challenge with just equity data in general is that it's so hard to come by. It's not organized. You don't know what it, like, and so I think the goal there is just to kind of have a one-stop shop where there's collections of data, from whether it's policing, housing, education, so on and so forth. And so folks can, we can make it easy to tell data stories related to those topics, right? Versus, having to, uncover every rock to figure out where that data lives. So I think Tableau is kind of working on that. When they're actually going to do that, I think is kind of TBD. And so we're, trying to figure out when that's going to drop, because that's going to be a huge piece. Because like hell, half the time it takes me about like a month to find my data and like 2 seconds to actually build the viz. And so if we can kind of take reduce the barrier of finding data, you'll get more people engaging in conversations led by data, around some of these equity topics.
Can I go on record with my dream? If we just took the census data and put that out cleaned it and put it out on the hub, imagine that. It would have all the geospatial, it would have all the shape files, it would have all the questions that you might want to ask about food insecurity and about transportation and housing and vacancy rates in communities. I mean, that to me is what we need. I mean, that's where all these other organizations are going, to that mothership. And so I've just been working like crazy trying to get people a little more literate around that sort of data, so that when we get our diennial, with all its flaws, obviously, that we can actually do something super meaningful. There's healthcare information in there, there's everything in there, and I feel like it's free. I mean, it is free, and I just feel like we keep kind of circling around it and don't acknowledge what a resource it could be. That's just me. I'm off my soapbox now.
No, I mean, that's just one example, or even like policing data, and just like certain things that are topics that I think data can shed light. Because I always like to say, data is the best sunlight sometimes to topics where people have like kind of varying opinions, and then there's just the facts. Now, data obviously is not objective, so I don't want to kind of sell that story either, right? It's not as neutral of a golden nugget that it is, but it's as close as we can get to some objective facts around certain topics, right? And I think being able to kind of step into that and have it widely accessible to everyone, I think is going to make all of us better, right? Because then I think we can start lifting the veil of ignorance around this, right? Because I think there's just a lot of confusion around, these conversations, right?
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, because, I was talking to somebody, it may have been on a Fringe Festival thing, and I was saying, don't get all high horse on me because you say you use like, raw data. That's biased too. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you're making the decision what data to bring into the conversation. That is subjectivity, and people were kind of blown. That was the most retweeted thing that I said, because people were having these aha moments. Like, wait, what do you mean? Data isn't like objective? I was like,
there's a great book. It's called Weapons of Mass Destruction. And it talks about just how much data is not neutral, and in fact it can be used as weapons against even these very efforts.
Here's another good one. I don't know if you guys can see this.
How to make the world add up. Yeah,
Sarah,
Yeah.
I saw Sarah Bartlett lurking on there. This is from the UK. Shout out to the UK. But this is a great book. Really good book.
Yeah, Everybody Lies is the one I was thinking of.
So I mean, there's just like there's an entire body of data ethics, or the lack thereof, that kind of underscore just how data has the ability to create gaps and to, you know, or close them, right? And so I guess the reason why I'm on this task force is I do want to use data to close gaps, right? And so, and it, you know, and or provide access to folks that will use it, right? And so that's kind of like the reason for me being here. And I kind of like to say that it doesn't feel performative, so I didn't feel icky about joining, right? Because I think that's half of I'm always wary about, you know, initiatives like, you know, like this. Honestly, I am, especially when it feels like a direct reaction to, you know, kind of the social unrest that we've been experiencing. But I feel like Tableau is doing it a little bit differently, and it feels genuine. And I think they're being transparent in the idea of they don't exactly know where to start. We're figuring it out, right? But at least there's a willingness to kind of make a long-term, not investment, I guess they are making investments, but to engage the conversation beyond, you know, just kind of, let's just quell the moment, and make sure that people think that we're, you know, of the moment, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. How about you, Josh? What do you see as, you know, something that you'd like to really see broaden and bring into this conversation?
Yeah, I think I'm going to use the word vulnerability, and in two directions there. So one, as I mentioned with the invisible illness, you know, the vulnerability to admit. People don't like hearing, and sometimes I suspect people wish I was a little bit more or less vulnerable about my illness, given it's a digestive disease, but they don't always like hearing about it. And then people that have illnesses like this don't always feel appropriate speaking up. But I remember being a speaker at a Tableau conference, and you know, I asked, or sorry, this was when I was at the Ironvis competition. I was like, listen, you want me up there on stage? You best have some bathrooms nearby. And you best have a bathroom that is ready for me to access. I don't know if you need to like guard it, keep it open, but there is a significant chance I will have to leave the stage. Prepare yourselves. That is what it means to have someone with a disability compete up on stage. When I mentioned that and was transparent about it, it was interesting how many people then felt vulnerable enough to admit their own needs and what they needed to be part of this group. So I think there's that vulnerability. I think there's also the vulnerability of being a white male and admitting that I've made mistakes and I need to learn. I grew up very rural, so we talk about needing to know the other. There was no other in my community. The closest we had is I would very infrequently interact with, in my hometown, one Hispanic family and two Black families. That was it. The things I learned and was taught growing up until I came to college and went to Ohio State University, right, neck and neck with a couple others for being the biggest in the world, there was no diversity. And I remember encountering that suddenly like a culture shock, a tidal wave of people that didn't look like me. And my background doesn't come from data. It comes from more the humanities side. So folklore and creative writing. And I was just surrounded by diversity and enforced in an academic discipline to learn about people that weren't like me and how they expressively and artistically communicate with each other. That made me realize how much of what I had learned and been taught was wrong, how many narratives I had going through my mind that were just blatantly false, narratives that were easy to subscribe to because I didn't see an other. There was no one to show me that the things I had learned were not truth. And so I think having that vulnerability to say, I'm gonna look back on my past and tell you that it is not perfect. I'm gonna look back on my past and say some of the things that I have subscribed to and thought were truth, I would look back on those now and say those are absolutely not true and are abhorrent. And those are the kinds of falsehoods that I value others for bringing to me. What the vulnerability that I hope to create in the community, in addition to that vulnerability to admit that sort of weakness, is the vulnerability to admit that I have a lot to learn. I have so much to learn. And I know that in 5, 10, 15 years, I'm going to look back at me in this moment on this task force and say, wow, I had some terrible narratives running through my head and I still have a lot to learn. That's the kind of vulnerability that I think needs to happen for these conversations to take light. I can speak specifically on behalf of my demographic and needing that openness so that we can create more seats and more space and welcome others into this group. That's hopefully, if we want to call it an edge. No one has ever described me as having an edge, but if we want to call it an edge, that'd probably be my piece in the community.
Well, when I say edge too, what I mean is stepping away from the normal distribution, like not going along with the masses, like looking back maybe at the normal curve and saying like, well, I'm not so much right over there, I'm more over here, that sort of thing. And the big joke in a piece that I wrote recently was, because, I'm in my, I guess, 6th decade of life. And I remember making the joke that I've been Black for 15 years because I was, I'm biracial and I just lived my life in a bubble. I mean, I never really stepped over what I would get irritated when someone said, are you Black or white? And I'm like, and then over the years, little boxes showed up that allowed you to say, oh, look, I can be more than one thing, and those sorts of things evolved. But, for really embracing, who I feel like I am in the world and wanting to know more about the culture, I'm sitting right next to you, with all the mistakes that I've made and the, just a lot of, it's kind of funny when I talk about it with, my brown sisters and friends, when I tell them what I was thinking and why I'm this, why I was here instead of there. And I shared very publicly after George Floyd's death. I felt like the least I can do is to be candid about where I was and how I've been represented. And I lost my scholarship to medical school by a woman who said I wasn't Black enough to receive it. And that just, and I shared the story. I named names, I said the school, I was like, you know what, I need to put this behind me. And so many people reached out to me. And I ended up working at that university in the internal medicine department, and seeing some of my peers, and they'd be like, what are you doing here? I mean, it's very liberating to speak a truth and not to feel like you have to protect somebody. And you can speak a truth with data. I teach people how, when you have a data question, and back to what we were talking about earlier about, sometimes what I think some of the older members of the Tableau community can bring is the intricacy of bringing a data question where you hold attention in your hand. You don't just bring the data that you can access that can answer this question, but what about the data that might show an opposing view, or the data that might unravel what you believe to be true? So that's what I think is really important when we start poking at, these sorts of questions around equity. And a question that I wanted to leave everyone with, to answer, and then we can move to a Q&A is, okay, think ahead like a year. I believe the terms for being on the task force are like 12 months perhaps. What for you at the end of that service, what would success look like? And this isn't like a This America, Miss America, where you're like, oh, I want world peace. And, I mean, like, just be real. Like, what would you, if you saw this certain thing come to fruition, would you be like, okay, this was successful for this period of time? Let's go with Siddele. He's looking pretty cheeky over there.
I went a bunch of different directions. I think for me, what I want, and it's a little bit of an abstraction, but I think what I want more than anything is for every person to feel like they have a shot at what they want in life. And well, in life, yes, on my personal life, but even when it comes to Tableau, I think when we look at the Zen Master program, the Ambassador program, Ironvis, like all the different things, tug speakers, like I want to look at a year and feel like everyone had a moment throughout that year to be heard, represented, seen. I'll commend you. I think this is probably one of the more diverse tug meetings I've been to, and definitely the most diverse speakers. And unfortunately, it's only when we talk about diversity do we see such diversity. But I think that's what I'm trying to push hard for, is that, because I think that's part of that bridge, is that the people that are seen most in the Tableau community need to feel like the people that are watching them. And that is something I think we can accomplish in the next year.
Next.
I mean, for me, so there's like today's community of Tableau folks, right? And what I want to do within the next year is to specifically identify barriers of full participation at multiple levels, right? So not just working professionals or students or whatever that deal with Tableau, but really, like, I want us to kind of capture and create a bridge to potential pipelines. And so while right now it may not be diverse, that we're planting seeds over the next, this year, but that we might see grow, that we may be able to harvest, in years to come, right? And so that's that's what I want to do, is I want to figure out how we can extend hands back, so to reach back and grab more people, that haven't either felt like they could fully participate or haven't had the access or awareness to kind of drive into, and it's not just the Tableau community, but it's the data space in general, but using Tableau as that conduit, right? Because I feel it's easy, it's successful, and there's motivation within that company to do that, right? And so that's what I want is, and I'm not sure if that looks like mentorship or, partnering with, organizations that are actually already doing the work that we may be able to draft off their efforts and amplify. But that's kind of, for me, what success would look like, right? It's not just, making the community today look, different. It's about future generations of this community, because I feel like, if it doesn't, there's a social consequence of, not having an inclusive or equitable space, right? But the consequences is bigger than just, if people feel like they can go to a tug or not. I think that when people get left behind, especially when you start talking about data and technology and everything else, the ramifications, as you think about, the way the economy is going to be built off of this stuff, the way that it's already going, I mean, have ramifications for wealth generation and all that kind of stuff. So that's where I'm like, I kind of want to use this as the bridge to kind of facilitate that. So for me, it's about planting seeds.
Love it. How about you, Josh?
I think there was a metaphor I heard one time that I really like, and I think is appropriate here, which is steering a cruise ship with an oar. We think about diversity in Tableau, a multi-billion-dollar organization owned by one of the largest corporations in the world. Not necessarily that we're solving diversity within that, but the community that is supported by and surrounds those products. And we have a community that is alive. It has established norms and folklore and patterns of speech and conversations and cliques and social circles. And this isn't a thing that we need to get up and running and make sure it looks good. This isn't a car that we're building and getting started for the first time. This is something in motion with a lot of momentum that we're trying to steer. And I would hope that at the end of this first year, there is direction, meaningful direction. So the things that were all mentioned, I see as being critical to making sure that we have that direction, that momentum, making sure that we have pathways forwards and backwards for new people in the community, that we have those pipelines established, that we have metrics that we're going to align ourselves to and ways to stay accountable. Ultimately, that direction, that steered cruise ship, if you will, would be signified by not only a norm, but an expectation that we can and we will talk about these things, that we're not just going to get grumpy every time we see a Zen Master panel or an ambassador panel that isn't representative. We're all going to throw our arms up at Tableau and say we want better, and then as a community forget about that, except for those few key voices that always care, that we're as a community all going to care and we're all going to demand better. And it is a norm for our community that this is something we care about, and it's not something we care about at a few key moments to show solidarity with our friends. It's a thing we care about and actively push toward all the time, not just the task force, but it's a norm in our community. Those are, I think, very ambitious goals, but that's why we're formed, is to think about how we can do that and to really create those norms.
And I thank you for saying that, because like just today, somebody on the Tableau side reached out and said, wow, I want to know more about what you're working on. You know, and like that would never happen before the conversation started, where you could see us all interacting and doing, you know, I always have this in acting. If you're a established actor, you could have it in your contract, offer only. Like, I'm not going to come audition for you, and I'm not going to, you know, do all that stuff. If you want to hire me, hire me. And, you know, and that's where some of us older data analyst professionals feel. Like, I feel like I'm not going to fill out like all this stuff. You know, I'm public enough with what I write and how I participate in the data world, even outside of Tableau. You know, Tableau is a tool. I know a lot of times, you know, we treat it like an ideology, but it is a tool. And there's Python and there's other tools that people want. And a lot of times when you come at them and you say, well, no, you can only do this if you have Tableau Prep, and you can only do that. So every time I teach, I go, here's Tableau Prep. It's great. It's exquisite. You don't have it. Here's how you write the code in Python, where you can clean up your data similarly. And I've always taught that way. And I feel like this is that time, you know, where we can reach out to each other and offer solutions. And I feel like, Kendra, you want to say something before we go off to Q&A? Your box is lit.
No, I was just amening you.
Oh, I felt it. Can I get an amen? Now, I don't know how we can do questions because I don't see the Q&A, but does anyone have, let me look and see if we do it in chat. Does anyone have any questions for the panel?
Yeah, you can submit questions in the chat.
Oh, somebody. Okay, there's some stuff here. There's a question from, I feel like this is a question from William. He is my new buddy. William, are you there? Can you want to come live and talk and ask your question, or do you want me to read it? I think he's the leader, one of the leaders of the Charlotte Tableau user group. I'm just going to read his question. He says, earlier today, a colleague mentioned she'd like to work with a nonprofit. In Charlotte, we've traditionally had a challenge finding a nonprofit to work with. I suggested working with this new data hub. Kendra, you mentioned it's all to be determined. You also mentioned police data. Is there a specific data set or a specific analysis you would recommend to get started? Now, really quick, before anyone answers that, I want to let you know and offer myself up, not as the be all end all, but I do have quite a collection of like police data, of all the things that you can imagine. So I'm open to anyone asking me for data sources. I am happy to share them and let you explore. I taught a 2-hour class on where to find data. So I have some resources I am happy to share with anyone. This question is specific to you since the task force is kind of just coming up. Can you recommend any data sources, I guess, outside of like census data that you might recommend? You know, he specifically asked about the police data. I know Stanford did a huge data set on police data that's national. It's not just California. Do you know of other data sets that you might recommend?
Yeah, so it goes across your interest group. So let me, before I get to that, Bonnie, yes, I want all of that data. So do you have it on like a GitHub or anything?
I'll figure it all out for you.
All right, cool. I just want to make sure I didn't like, start rambling and forget that, yes, I wanted all the things that you just said. But related to some of the data, sometimes Washington Post actually has a data repository that they collect like on education stuff, on, like policing, some housing, but it's like, different topics, but kind of sporadic.
ProPublica too.
Yes. Yep. ProPublica is another one. And then 538 actually has some data sets that I like to, so like I just kind of, so those are like the three main ones, but then Tableau actually published recently, like maybe last month and the month before last, a data set on like policing that I used for a recent biz. I mean, it didn't like and they had the full caveat there, which is policing data is very difficult to get because there's not standard collection of it and definitions and things of that nature. And so it's kind of, user beware, and also make sure that you know what you're, like you don't misinterpret something just because there's not a lot of definition around it. So the sources I just mentioned are my usual go-tos. And then, Tableau has something on policing as well, but it's not super robust, but I think they're kind of building upon that.
And CDC Wonder data, depending how current you want the data. If the data needs to be like 2019 or later, there's different resources I would point you towards, but if it can be a little more looking at patterns over time, CDC Wonder data, if you just want to look at, gunshots and murders and, big bucket stuff, they have quite a robust data set that you can do to the county level, pretty much. So, I mean, there's a lot of, depending on what your data question is, I would probably pivot to different resources. And William doesn't have a microphone. That's why he's not responding to us.
Oh, good. One I would also add, it's similar, and so I would have to add the similar caveat is that it's not always the most up to date, but the government, or I forget what's the specific agency, but they released a site called Data.gov to basically house every data set that all the agencies collect. So CDC data, HHS data, FDA data, all that stuff lives on a site called Data.gov. So that's a really great place. To your point, Bonnie, I don't know how much of it is like 2020, 2019, but you can get a ton of information there. 538, I absolutely agree with. I also use, if anyone's in the coding space, Kaggle has a lot of interesting data.
I was just going to say, Kaggle. Don't let it out. It's a secret.
I'll also say I've had limited success with Google data sets. They have a search engine where you can search for data sets. It's kind of hit or miss depending on what you're looking for, but there might be something there depending on what your interest is.
If you're looking for something a little bit more refined, and this one comes a little bit of a story, but localized police departments, if you're in the right size city with the right kind of accountability, they may make their data available. The story that goes with that, a friend of mine from a rural area not far outside of Columbus was talking about how immigrants were coming into Columbus and causing the crime rate to skyrocket. And he told me to do my homework because of the stories he had seen on Fox News. So I did my homework. I downloaded the data set, and I found that since immigration has increased in Columbus, Ohio, violent crime has dramatically decreased. So if you want that correlation, there you go. There's lots of, depending on the nuance you're looking for and the direction you're heading, there's lots of local sites out there. And then the FBI will also sometimes have that data available. But I really want to caveat that with as has already been mentioned, you got to do your research on that. The definitions are never clear. Things almost always don't quite mean what you think they mean. There's just a lot of ways to get tripped up in that kind of data. So make sure you download a data dictionary and you read that thoroughly before you start publishing any data.
Mhm.
I actually went to we were doing, before COVID, we were trying to figure out why we had so many gunshot deaths in my small little community here in North Carolina. And I went and I was looking at the data, and it was so weird because I'm like, well, you have the data on the person that pulled the trigger, but what about, I mean, the victim, but I want to know about the person that pulled the trigger. Where's that data? That was an entirely different department to find out who the perpetrator was versus who the victim was. And then people they don't release the numbers until they solve the crime. So there's a body sitting there that was clearly shot up and dead, but they don't include it in the tally until they actually consider the crime solved. And if you're looking at age-related data, they will not release that data if there's only like 3 16-year-olds that were killed, because now they're identifiable and they're minors. They don't end up going in the data. So you really do, like you said, you have to understand what your question is and be very specific about where you go to try to find the data to answer it. So I really like that you mentioned that. Now, are there any other questions? Oh, Brad, Brad had a really good question that is a good one. There's more coming in, but what can members of the Tableau community, like in our user group, what are types of things that might be helpful to the task force? And the reason I think this is kind of complicated, because there seems to be an internal effort being done by Tableau within its own ranks, and then there's the community, the external part, beyond even Tableau. Like, how do we make change in the communities where we live, not just internally? So I was curious if you could think of anything that community members that aren't involved in the task force necessarily can do to help, besides maybe identify data resources, because I think that was a good turn that the conversation took, because it might be very helpful. Anyone?
Yeah, I think it cuts up and down to me. I think part of it is, how do you go about making sure that your groups, it's not that the groups have to be necessarily diverse or equitable, but how do you advance that within your space? So if you're not yourself, can you bring people in? Like, I don't know, especially now during COVID time, I don't know why, I'm not sure of all the tugs in New York, but I would imagine there's some synergy there that can happen where Piedmont and some other area in the state can have tugs and have the perspectives kind of cross collaborate on. And so I think that's one area. But I think down also, and I think Kendra mentioned this in terms of like being that bridge, we're all in all these different areas that all have their own unique challenges. How do you go about bringing in those sorts of people? I mean, I can only really think of 2 examples of engagements within the tug, from the tug to the schools, area organizations, things like that. I think that's, especially with having a specialized knowledge of the area, which is where all these people are from, I think that's a really great way to be a part of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's something that the part that has always kind of been painful about the COVID, and we were making great prides in our community, and we were having an event. I was planning an event, it didn't happen, for our tug at our Civil Rights Museum downtown, which is where the Woolworth sit-ins were and all of that. And it was going to be this great thing. Well, of course, with COVID, it's like, wah, wah, wah. So now I did reach out to William in Charlotte. He was very welcoming and joining me into there's a few tugs here in North Carolina, which, because of COVID and because of the virtual nature of what we're doing now, we're going to start kind of meeting, hopefully, and broadening these conversations. So it's not so Sisyphean, rolling that boulder up the hill all the time. So, I appreciate And William says, thank you. And we have a, we're going to be doing we're going to be giving away a Tableau commuter bag after we do a little bit of conversation around the conference. So if anyone from the panel, especially those of you who are highlighted a bit during the conference, I'm not going to point, but we're just going to do a quick overview of the conference that just wrapped up last week. And just really quick, I'm going to just share the ones that I thought were great, park it on a slide, and if you guys want to add something, and then, you know, we can raffle off the bag and call it a night. I feel I'm very energized by the energy in this conversation, and I'm excited to continue, you know, with you guys, you know, and hear more and do more and broaden the conversation and really stay tuned to how this is evolving, because I know you guys are going to be bringing some really unique things. So what I wanted to just share really, and this is quick, I thought this anatomy of a dashboard for financial services, which you wouldn't think it would resonate with me because I don't work in financial services. I work in healthcare, but I learned a lot about the beauty of simplicity and how a really nice, and this speaks to something that's not super fancy. You know, there's no fancy graphic or anything, but I recommend this session. And I, you know, I didn't look at them all. So there's probably others that are equally as great. I really love the simplicity in this, in conveying information. So those of us maybe like Josh that, you know, have to create these dashboards where multiple people can get information from, I thought the way she went about connecting these questions, I thought was a really good session. And I like TabPy because it's a pain in my neck. But when I get it to work, you've never seen a happier person in your life because it's brilliant. I've moved all my data modeling and things into TabPy. So I really like looking at sessions where people are doing it a little more organized than I am. I'm usually just like flying through, but I love the peek under the hood and why something's done a certain way and the simplicity. So I thought this was another good one. And I think we all love the speed tipping. I learned something every single time, and this was probably my 7th conference. And I've been to 6 live, and I'm still learning like all of this stuff, that little things that make a huge difference. So I recommend the speed tipping sessions. And this is Brad's. I don't know, Brad, can you talk?
Yeah, I can talk.
Just really
I agree
quick.
with you.
This dev stuff is yours.
I agree with you on that finance one, because I actually saw another one. We won't go have a link to that one. And the problem that I had with the other one was that they spent a lot of time trying to make it look cute. And I think that cute, oftentimes, they try to trump effective. And for me, charts, Tableau, and whatnot, it's all about how to communicate some sort of story, some sort of message very effectively. And cute sometimes gets in the way. Anyway, devs at decks. Man, even at the desk, they were still overwhelming. Things that I knew that I had problems with, you had all sorts of things going on there, that on both the server side and on the desktop side. And Ironvis, how can you ever not miss Ironvis? So to me, those are 2 things I gotta watch. They mentioned that they're gonna have Ironvis's sessions later on during the year where they actually focus on what the folks were doing, et cetera, which those will be interesting to find out.
So
that's it.
And I'm going to be sharing this in a PDF over on the community page for the Piedmont Forum, Tableau, whatever we're called, what are we, Piedmont user group, just in case you guys want to remember how to get these. And we're going to give away the swag bag. Did you pick somebody that's local? Because I have to deliver it, so it's got to be.
Which way do you want to have it done?
Well, just the way you did it last time, where you just randomly pick somebody that was still here at the end that wins the bag.
I came out with one that's from Charlotte. Is that deliverable?
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Okay, then Daniel, still trying to connect to audio, so we can't hear him go, whoop, whoop, whoop. Use the random function of Excel. Sorry, I know. Bad move there. Probably should have used Tableau. But I put in each of y'all's names, and that's what popped up.
All right, well, give me the name and I'll reach out. Daniel Hall? Daniel who?
Daniel Hall.
I'll reach out and figure that out. So what I want to do while I'm thanking everyone for participating, I want you to know that
Daniel is actually High Point, Bonnie.
Oh, same thing.
Oh, that's
No, I'm joking. I'll find him. I just didn't want to have to ship this thing to Sarah in the UK. But what I wanted to say to the remaining panel is you have a home here. If you want to share anything, if you have something you want to talk about, I invite you back anytime, because it's a area of profound interest and to me personally, and I'm going to be stalking you anyway, so this will make it less awkward if I allow you to stalk back. So what's next is just, we're going to be sending out the schedule for our next round of socially distanced, probably Zoomy tugs for the foreseeable future. I'd like to pull in more of some of our North Carolina friends that are also remote, that are in Raleigh and Charlotte. I appreciate those of you who are able to join and support us and contribute to the conversation. Ah, baby! There's your baby! Josh, Josh left. Josh, you're not gonna let her win the baby war. Look how cute he is. What I have to tell you about her is that when I tell her I'm having a bad day, I need to see her baby, she'll post a picture of him for me. So I appreciate that. So I want to thank everybody. You know how to reach out to us to connect. I'll post the video when we get it back from Tableau, so you can share it and enjoy it. And I'll also give you the PDF so that you have some of the links for what we've talked about. And I'm happy to share some of the data resources. I'll probably just put those over in the community forum for the Piedmont Triad user group. So does anyone else have any final question, or we can go enjoy our, typically we will be Thursdays, but what I wanted to say is Tableau is getting extremely efficient with these remotes. So what we have to do is book our time. So now, instead of making it the Thursday that I feel like having, whenever I feel like having it, I have to be a little more organized. So I think we probably will go back to the Thursday format, but I'll give you those dates ahead of time, just so we kind of know where we're headed. Anyone else want to closing comments or ask a final question, Brad?
No, it's just if Rashid's still around, he mentioned about the Carolina's virtual tug. Wonderful. We want to be part of it. So contact Bonnie or I.
Can you guys hear me? Oh, yeah, William. Yeah, William's the he's already putting it together. You guys are already going to be in, I think he just sent the thing the other day, but yeah, that was the plan all along. You guys are definitely a part of it. You're part of it right now. As far as we're concerned, yeah.
We've done the driving to Charlotte. We've done the driving to Raleigh. Not really interested.
Thank you so much for the support, guys. I'm looking forward to what we can do, together during these Zoomy times. So I appreciate it. Anyone else? I really enjoyed this. This was fun. I like the conversational stuff. I also like when we kind of share things. If you have something you're working on, a dashboard or something that you want to offer up for our next meeting, we can do it in any way you want. You can present, you can put it out there where we do like a makeover thing. We make some suggestions, anything you want. We're open to, this is yours. This is yours. This is your gathering. I don't want to just make it the Bonnie and Brad show. I mean, I could show you all the stuff I'm doing, but I'd rather hear from you. We do jump in from time to time. but I really want to encourage anyone who's maybe a little shy or maybe not so shy now that we're all Zooming like it's our job. Maybe more people want to step forward and, you know, get in front of the camera. I don't know. Thank you, everybody.